Hey there, I am Jagdeep Singh.
And I am Mankirt Kaur.
Our topic is Canadian Army, World Wars, and Post War Skirmish.
The two world wars are the ones we generally know about, but Canada being a part of it and effectively being amazing in wars is a totally different thinking. Canada has served in different wars, but its actions are still unknown yet. The general rule of law will be from the First World War to the latest big operations before COVID.
Any idea how many soldiers that Canada had when it came into being as Canada? The answer is here in first module, so let's get into it.
To begin with World War I, in 1914, before the war broke out, Canada was a dominion of the British Empire. When the war broke out, Canada had less than 8 million population and an army of 3,110 men and only extra 2 training ships. Being under British Empire, Canada was automatically at war when Britain declared a war against Germany. The enthusiasm in the new immigrants helped attaching 1 lakh men to war even before a call for 20,000 men was officially sent. The first group, called Canada's Answer, comprising of 31,000 men, embarked for Europe in October 1914. Canada made their first impression on battlefield in Second Battle of Ypres in April 1915. On 22nd April, battlefield saw a German offensive that was an attack of 168 tons of chlorine gas over French trenches in Kitchener Wood and Saint Julien, which killed thousands of troops and even forced the retreat from trenches. Canadians held the line even facing heavy losses and were successful. Later, French Field Marshal Ferdinand Foch called Canadian actions at Kitchener's Wood as the greatest act of the war. Now, at the Western Front, there were 4 CEF divisions, so the Canadian leader insisted unifying them and continuing to battlefield. And on April 9, 1917, these 4 Canadian divisions fought unified, representing Canada more than a part of British Army. 97,184 men achieved a big victory on Vimy Ridge that was heavily trenched by German soldiers and a strategic ridge that overlooked the Douai Plain in the northern France. Lieutenant General Arthur Currie, a failed real estate and land developer, had a big part in Vimy Ridge attack and capture planning.
Due to reduced workforce in Canada, Quebec City had rioters, and on Good Friday 1918, 15,000 of them emerged. This caused the government to call for the army, and there was a clash on Monday, which resulted in 4 of the rioters dead and many more wounded. But the battlefield was not yet done.
The British Prime Minister David Lloyd George stated, whenever the Germans found Canadian corps coming into the line, they prepared for the worst. A 100-day offensive from August 8 and November 11, 1918 was led by Canadian Army and was successfully won without many casualties. Canada was then one of the signatories of Treaty of Versailles that was written to keep peace among nations. A veteran of Vimy Ridge said, we went up the ridge as Albertans and Nova Scotians, but we came down as Canadians. The Newfoundland had kept itself separate from the Canadian Army and fought with its own regiment. They took 90% losses in a heroic advance on Germans. King George V gave the regiment the prefix Royal. This was given only once in World War I and only third time in the history.
The Second World War was a defining event in Canadian history, transforming a quiet country on the fringes of global affairs into a critical player in 20th century's most important struggle. Canada carried out a vital role in the Battle of Atlantic and the air war over Germany and contributed forces to campaigns of Western Europe beyond what might be expected of a small nation of then only 11 million people. Government arranged with Britain for the 1st Canadian Infantry Division to join the attack on Sicily in 1943 July, and subsequently insisted upon building its Mediterranean force up to 2 division corps. In the landing phase, Only the 3rd Division and 2nd Canadian Armored Brigade were engaged and fighting under 2nd British Army. The Army's Central Colonel was the 2nd Canadian Corps under Lieutenant General G.G. Simons, who had commanded the 1st Division in Sicily. It was composed of 2nd and 3rd Canadian Infantry Division and the 4th Canadian Armored Division. The final phase of Canadian involvement in Italy found 1st Canadian Corps, now commanded by Lieutenant General Charles Fox, fighting its way across the Lombard Plain, hindered by mud and swift flowing rivers. The corps' advance ended at the Singh River in the first day of 1945. 92,757 Canadian soldiers of all ranks had served in Italy, and 5,764 had lost their lives. When German attack on Poland on 1st September 1939 finally led Britain and France to declare war on Germany, King summoned Parliament to decide, as he pledged. Declaration of war was postponed for a week, during which Canada was formally neutral. The armed forces were rapidly enlarged. Conscriptions were introduced in June 1940 for home defense, and expenditure grew enormously. The Canadian formations played a leading part in breakout from the Normandy bridgehead in August. Normandy was one of the most heavily guarded regions by Germany. Operation Overlord was designed for the Normandy invasion at Juno Beach on 6 June 1944. The day was named as D-Day. Many lives were lost, but they had the advantage now, which helped shaping the war afterwards. The army excelled, and the Canadians' formation helped fighting against fierce opposition to reach French town of Falaise and subsequently to close the gap south of it through which the enemy was retiring to avoid being trapped between British and Canadians coming from the north and the Americans approaching from the south. Falaise was took over on August 16, and on 19 August contact was finally made across the gap.
German frontier was the next target, and 1st Canadian Army, with 1st British Corps under command, took over coastal fortresses and then Le Havre, Boulogne, and Calais. British, although successfully took Antwerp, enemy still held the banks of Scheldt River. The port was a major advantage for the sides possessing the control, so October and first week of November see a bitter and fierce battle involving Canadians and the enemy troops to gain control of the river. Then came the first major operation by Canadian in 1945, the Battle of Rhineland. The Maas and Rhineland was taken over after a long strategic push from February 8 to March 10 by Canadian Army with 9th Division of US Army covering their back. The final operation held when Rhine was to be cleared, as they still were on the left of the line. East and north of Netherlands was liberated, which led to a push into northern German plains. Germans rounded on Field Marshal Montgomery's front on May 5th. 2nd Canadian Corps took over Oldenburg. Canada had a big role in air campaign in German skies and served as navy more than Blitzkrieg. The major air campaign was led by a landmark formation of No. 6 Bomber Group of the RAF Bomber Command on January 1, 1943. It grew ultimately to 14 squadrons. It was commanded successively by Air Vice Marshals G. Brooks and C. M. McVin. The Bomber Command's task was the night bombing of Germany, a desperately perilous job calling for sustained fortitude. Almost 10,000 Canadians lost their lives in this command. Navy saw a small number at steering of campaign, but it grew to be 99,688 men and some 6,500 women. It manned 471 fighting vessels of various types. Its primary task was convoy protecting the troop and supply ships across the Atlantic. It carried an increasing proportion of this burden, fighting grim battles, sometimes of several days' duration, with U-boat wolf packs. Its vast expansion produced some growing pains. In 1943, measures had to be taken to improve its escort vessels' technical equipment and, in some cases, crew training. During the war, it sank or shared in sinking 33 enemy submarines.
After the Atlantic Convoy Conference in Washington in March 1943, the Canadian Northwest Atlantic Command was set up, covering the area of New York City and west of 47th Meridian. A Canadian officer, Rear Admiral R.W. Murray, was responsible for convoys in this area. Apart from this, their main task in the Battle of the Atlantic, Canadian naval units took part in many other campaigns, including supporting the Allied landing in North Africa in November 1942 and to the Normandy operations of June 1944. The RCN contributed 110 vessels and 10,000 men. During the war, it lost 24 warships, ranging from the Tribal class destroyer Athabaskan, sunk in the English Channel in April 1944, to the armed yacht Raccoon, torpedoed in the St. Lawrence in September 1942. In personnel, the Navy had 2,024 fatalities. September 11, 2001, four civilian airliners are hijacked. Two deliberately crashed into World Trade Center, another one into Pentagon, resulting in deaths of 3,000 innocent people. First time the terrorism strikes at international level. This time, not only US was seeking revenge and punishment to the terrorists, but Canada too stood up and asked to take part in this operation. Afghanistan had become a battlefield. Before this, let's know what the situation was until the Canada kicked in.
A civil war broke in Afghanistan when Soviet Union withdrew its military and now Taliban regime gained the control in Afghanistan. Taliban supported international terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and this led to the 9/11 attacks. US took permission from National Atlantic Treaty Organization and UN went into war with Taliban on Afghanistan's soil. Canada saw its first approach in October 2001. Navy ships were sent into southwestern Asia to keep an eye on any unknown boat and search for illegal activities and to support the international fleets as well as defend them. The Aurora patrol aircraft and Hercules and Polaris transport planes of the Canadian Armed Force Air Command would also be active in Afghanistan and waters of Southwest Asia to serve as support for transport and surveillance on and off ground and waters. Canadian helicopters also helped merchant ships to move out safely. December 2001 saw the commandos from the Allied force joining, followed by Canadian soldiers in January 2002. They all joined American and British fighting against Taliban regime. Taliban group eventually fell and UN assigned National Atlantic Treaty Organization force to take over the task of establishing an Afghanistan army and establish a new Afghan government. More than 700 Canadians was then stationed protecting and patrolling Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan. Other more than 200 were serving as support in Southwest Asia.
2005, and the Canadians had to return again on Kandahar region, and they were welcomed with targeted attacks on Canadian army from the resurging Taliban. The soldier numbers swelled to near about 2,300 to help control the situation and help provincial reconstruction groups. Canadian weaponry, including tanks and artillery, saw massive use and helped making standoffs and offensives on large scale against massed Taliban forces. Named as Operation Medusa, this offensive happened in 2006 in Kandahar province, involving 1,000 Canadian military and was one of the largest offensives to ever happen after World Wars. The danger was all around. In 2011, the focus was shifted to training the police and army of the Afghanistan. After that, the Canada left the country in 2014. This marked the end of the Afghanistan operations.
Thank you for listening to us.